One evening, everything changed. Anthony had stepped out to take a shower, leaving his phone on the kitchen counter. A notification pinged, and Aaliyah, out of habit, glanced over at the screen. The message was from Linda. Aaliyah froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She picked up the phone, rereading the message over and over again. Aaliyah had always been proud of her marriage to Anthony. Their wedding had been a grand affair, celebrated by friends and family alike. 3 years later, they seemed stronger than ever. She often thought about how lucky she was to have found a man like Anthony. Tall, charming, successful, and most importantly, loyal. Together they had built a comfortable home and dreamed of starting a family soon. Yet, despite their love, Anthony had always been slightly reserved when it came to discussions about children. Aaliyah chalked it up to his focus on his business, and they both agreed to wait a few more years before starting a family. She believed everything was in perfect harmony. Their closest friend, Linda, was a constant presence in their lives. She was practically family, spending countless weekends with them, sharing meals and engaging in deep conversations. Aaliyah felt blessed to have such a strong friendship. If only she knew the depth of deception that lurked beneath the surface. The affair between Anthony and Linda had not started with ill intent. It began subtly, almost innocently. Linda had always been drawn to Anthony's confidence and intelligence, and during one weekend gathering, their eyes met across the table in a way that felt different. A harmless compliment turned into a private conversation, and soon enough, they were texting late into the night. What started as harmless flirtation spiraled into a secret relationship. Both knew the risks, but convinced themselves it would remain under control. They snuck out of town, met at hotels in distant cities, and took every precaution to keep their secret hidden from Aaliyah. It became a dangerous game, one that neither of them was willing to stop. With each passing month, their guilt deepened, but they told themselves it would eventually end. However, everything changed when Linda found out she was pregnant. Linda's pregnancy came as a shock, both to her and to Anthony. In a panic, they discussed their options. Abortion crossed her mind, but Linda couldn't bring herself to do it. She wanted the baby, even if it meant complicating everything. Anthony was at a loss for words. He was about to become a father, not with his wife, but with her best friend.
Anthony, I can't hide this forever,
Linda whispered one night after they met in secret.
Sooner or later, Aaliyah will find out.
We'll tell her it's someone else's child.
Anthony replied, trying to remain calm.
We just need to be careful.
Linda nodded, though doubt flickered in her eyes. She couldn't imagine how they would keep up this charade, but she trusted Anthony. He promised everything would be fine. But as the months passed, the lie grew heavier, and so did her belly. Aaliyah noticed when Linda began to gain weight, but she thought nothing of it at first. Linda had always been slim, so the change was more apparent than it might have been for others. One afternoon, when Aaliyah finally asked her about it, Linda hesitated before dropping the bombshell.
I'm pregnant.
Linda admitted, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and guilt.
Pregnant?
Aaliyah's eyes widened with shock and excitement.
Linda, why didn't you tell me sooner? Who's the father?
It was just a fling.
Linda lied, feeling her stomach churn.
He's not in the picture anymore.
Aaliyah's heart ached for her friend. She couldn't imagine how Linda was handling the pregnancy alone. From that moment on, she dedicated herself to being by her friend's side, doing everything she could to support her, driving her to appointments, helping her prepare for the baby, and constantly checking in on her. Meanwhile, Anthony played his part well. He remained calm and distant when it came to Linda's pregnancy, careful not to arouse Aaliyah's suspicions. But each time Aaliyah fawned over Linda and the baby, the guilt gnawed at him. The baby's arrival brought joy and excitement. Linda gave birth to a beautiful baby boy, and Aaliyah was there every step of the way. She held Linda's hand during labor, wiped her tears, and welcomed the newborn with open arms. To Aaliyah, this was an extension of the love she had for her best friend. The baby boy, named Kayon, had soft curls and wide, inquisitive eyes. Aaliyah marveled at him, yet, as she held him close, she couldn't help but notice something strange. There was something familiar about Kayon, something in his smile, in his eyes. At first she dismissed it, but the thought remained lodged in the back of her mind.
Do you see it?
Aaliyah asked Anthony one night as they prepared dinner.
Keon looks a little like you, doesn't he?
Anthony's face tightened, but he quickly masked his discomfort.
You're imagining things, Aaliyah. Babies look like everyone.
Aaliyah laughed, shaking off the odd feeling.
Maybe. He's just adorable.
But the seed of doubt had been planted. Months went by, and Aaliyah became more involved in Keon's life. She helped Linda with babysitting and became emotionally attached to the child. The resemblance between Keon and Anthony still nagged at her, though she tried to dismiss it as mere coincidence. One evening, everything changed. Anthony had stepped out to take a shower, leaving his phone on the kitchen counter. A notification pinged, and Aaliyah, out of habit, glanced over at the screen. The message was from Linda. It read, "Your child needs you." Aaliyah froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She picked up the phone, rereading the message over and over again. Your child. Why would Linda send that to Anthony? It didn't make sense. Her mind raced as she recalled every strange interaction, every glance between Anthony and Linda, and every odd feeling she had dismissed. Slowly, it all began to add up. Aaliyah's mind was in turmoil. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, but she needed proof. Her curiosity had transformed into a gnawing suspicion she could no longer ignore. She decided to take matters into her own hands. Late one night, when Anthony was fast asleep, she quietly swabbed his toothbrush for a DNA sample. She felt her hands tremble, knowing that what she was about to uncover could shatter her world. She needed a sample from Keon too, but that was easy. Linda trusted her completely, and during her next visit, Aaliyah took a small hair sample from the baby. The DNA test results came in days later. Her hands shook as she opened the envelope. The words 100% match stared back at her. Anthony was Keon's father. Aaliyah's worst fears were confirmed. Her entire life had been a lie. Aaliyah's fury was unlike anything she'd ever felt before. Her chest tightened as she drove to Linda's house. She could barely see through the rage that clouded her vision. When she arrived at Linda's door, she was trembling with anger. Linda opened the door with a warm smile, completely unaware of what was about to unfold.
Aaliyah, I wasn't expecting.
Before she could finish, Aaliyah thrust the DNA results into her hands.
Explain this.
She shouted, her voice cracking. Linda paled as she read the document. Her hands began to shake, and she collapsed onto the sofa, tears streaming down her face.
I'm so sorry, Aaliyah.
Linda sobbed.
Please forgive me, Aaliyah. I never meant for it to happen like this. I've always loved him. I couldn't stop myself.
Aaliyah stared at her, cold and unflinching.
You were my best friend,
She whispered, her voice filled with venom.
and you took everything from me.
Aaliyah left Linda's house in a daze. She felt like a stranger in her own life, unable to comprehend the depth of betrayal she had just uncovered. Her marriage, her friendship, her very sense of self, everything had been torn apart. And in the middle of it all was the man she thought she knew. As she walked into her empty home, her eyes fell on Anthony's gun. He had always kept it hidden in the house for protection, but tonight, its presence felt like fate. Her mind was made up. There was no going back. With the gun hidden in her bag, Aaliyah returned to Linda's house. The look of terror in Linda's eyes when she opened the door would have given Aaliyah satisfaction if she weren't so hollow inside.
You took everything from me.
Aaliyah said, her voice as cold as steel, as she raised the gun. Linda's hands went up in surrender, trembling as her voice broke.
Aaliyah, please. I'm sorry. I never meant to.
The sound of the gunshot drowned out her words. Linda collapsed instantly, her eyes wide with disbelief, blood pooling beneath her. Aaliyah stood there for a moment, the gun still warm in her hand, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt a wave of nausea wash over her, but it quickly gave way to the numbness she had been craving. There was no turning back now. She'd crossed a line. The next target on her list was Anthony. Anthony was at work, seated at his desk, blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to hit him. He glanced at his watch, wondering when Aaliyah would call, perhaps to plan dinner or talk about their weekend plans. But that call never came. Instead, it was Aaliyah herself who showed up. As she entered his office, her face blank and her movements slow, Anthony's smile faltered. Something was off. The gun was hidden in her purse, its weight reminding her of the inevitable.
Aaliyah, what's going on? You don't look.
You destroyed me, Anthony.
She interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes were locked on him, cold and distant. Anthony stood up from his desk, confusion flooding his face.
What are you talking about?
Linda,
She said flatly, watching his expression shift from confusion to panic.
I know everything.
The colour drained from Anthony's face. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He took a cautious step toward her, but Aaliyah was faster. She pulled the gun from her purse and aimed it at him.
Aaliyah, wait. Let me explain.
There's nothing left to explain.
She replied, her voice hollow.
It's too late.
Anthony raised his hands in surrender, much like Linda had.
I made a mistake, but we can fix this. We can figure it out.
The shot rang out, silencing him forever. Anthony fell to the ground, his lifeless body crumpling in front of his desk, the blood slowly staining the expensive office carpet. Aaliyah stared at his body for a long time, waiting to feel something: grief, anger, guilt. But all she felt was emptiness. She had nothing left. As Aaliyah stood over her husband's body, she could hear the distant wail of police sirens growing louder. The world outside the office continued on as normal, unaware of the chaos that had unfolded inside. She knew they would arrive soon, but she didn't care. Her actions had sealed her fate. There was nothing left for her in this life. Linda was gone. Anthony was gone. And so was she. At least, the version of herself she once knew. The weight of the gun in her hand felt heavier now. The sound of the sirens drew closer. She could feel the police storming into the building, could imagine them running toward the office, but they were too late. Aaliyah slowly raised the gun to her own temple. Her heart pounded, but her mind was eerily calm. This was the only way out. With a final, deep breath, she closed her eyes and pulled the trigger. The aftermath of the tragedy left the community reeling. Newspapers and TV stations were filled with headlines about the murder-suicide that had shattered a seemingly perfect marriage. Friends, family, and colleagues all asked the same question. How could this have happened? The police pieced together the events through evidence and witness testimonies. It was clear that the affair between Anthony and Linda had driven Aaliyah to the edge, but no one could have predicted the extent of her breakdown. The betrayal had been too deep, the pain too unbearable. It had consumed her entirely. In the wake of the tragedy, Aaliyah's parents were left heartbroken, unable to understand how their daughter's life had unraveled so quickly. Anthony's family mourned the loss of their son, struggling to reconcile his betrayal with the man they had always known. Linda's family, too, was left in pieces, her child now orphaned and alone. Among those left behind, one person had been silently observing it all, an elderly neighbour who had been watching from her window the day Aaliyah left Linda's house. She had seen the pain in Aaliyah's eyes, the rage boiling beneath the surface, and had known something terrible was going to happen. The woman had known Aaliyah since she was much younger, watched her grow into the woman she became, and knew the story of her marriage to Anthony. In a way, she had seen it coming. Not the violence, but the cracks in the foundation of Aaliyah's world. The affair had not been hidden from everyone's eyes. There had been whispers, rumours, but no one dared speak up. She had thought of reaching out, of warning Aaliyah, but fear had held her back. Now she regretted her silence. She would carry that guilt for the rest of her life. Keon, Linda's baby, was left without a mother or father. The child, barely a year old, became a tragic symbol of the fallout from the affair. His innocent face, so much like Anthony's, was a reminder to all of what had been lost. Linda's estranged family reluctantly took the boy in. They too were dealing with the shame and anger of the scandal. As they looked into Keon's eyes, they couldn't help but wonder what kind of future awaited him. Would he ever know the truth about his parents? Would he carry the burden of their sins? For now, Keon was too young to understand the tragedy that had surrounded his birth. But the echoes of that day would follow him for the rest of his life. Years passed, and the events of that fateful day began to fade from public memory. The house where Anthony and Aaliyah once lived was sold to another family, and the office where Anthony had been killed was remodeled and given to a new occupant. Life moved on, as it always does, even in the wake of tragedy. But for those who had been close to Aaliyah, Anthony and Linda, the memory remained fresh, like a wound that refused to heal. Aaliyah's family held an annual vigil for her, remembering her as the vibrant, loving woman she had once been, before the darkness consumed her. Linda's family struggled with the weight of her betrayal. Though they mourned her death, they also harbored anger at the choices she had made. In their hearts, they knew she had played a part in her own downfall. The silence of memory echoed through the lives of those left behind, a reminder that betrayal, once sown, can destroy everything in its path. If you enjoyed this story, please support us by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Thank you for watching, and see you in our next story.